Joining us right now, Senator Pat Toomey of Pennsylvania. He is the ranking member of the Senate Banking Committee. And Senator, thank you for being here. We want to talk about the budget, but first, we'd like to talk to you about some headlines that have just been hitting. The markets are trading higher on this news, this idea that you could potentially have some sort of substantial peace talks happening between the Russians and Ukrainians. The Russian Defense Ministry is saying that to create conditions for dialogue, that they're going to be drastically scaling down but not stopping military activity around Kyiv and other cities. And that's certainly promising at this point. What are your thoughts on this very early news on this?
Yeah, certainly it sounds very hopeful, Becky. I'm not quite sure what to make of it. Obviously, the Russians have elevated lying to a very fine art, so who knows whether this is intended to deceive us. But what we do know for a fact is this invasion has been a complete disaster for them. They've performed miserably, and the Ukrainian defense forces have performed just unbelievably heroically. And maybe the Russians are looking for a way out. That would be really good news.
In terms of how we have done to this point, we are seeing the president ask for increased defense spending, in part because of this. Is it enough to satisfy you?
No, not at all. I mean, I think President Biden made some good moves. Sharing the intelligence about the Russian intentions early on, I think, was a useful device. But frankly, there's a lot more military hardware we should be providing to the Ukrainians, and we really should be working hard to lead our European allies in ending the purchases of Russian oil and gas. I mean, as we chat this morning, the Western world is funding Putin's war machine, buying the oil and gas that he takes the proceeds and uses in substantial part to fund this outrageous war. We've really got to stop that.
I don't think there's much argument on the other side of the table, the other side of the aisle, in terms of trying to wean Europe off of Russia's oil and natural gas. It's just not something that happens overnight. It will take years to do that.
Well, I think we've got to do it more quickly than that, Becky, because the people of Ukraine don't necessarily have years. I mean, they're losing people by the day, by the hour.
No, I
and they don't have the luxury of
the urgency,
knowing that by 2030. Yeah, well,
how do we fix this overnight?
You know, one of the things we've got going for us is springtime is arriving. And so with the warmer weather, there's a big seasonal decline in demand for gas. Between the United States and other sources, we can replace I think a large majority of the gas that would no longer be coming from Russia. You know, there's other ideas that have been floated. You know, it's very, very costly for the Russians to shut down their oil and gas production if they ever intend to reopen it. And so maybe the solution is to put the proceeds in escrow. After all, our fight is not with the Russian people, it's with Putin and the leadership. Maybe they'd continue to deliver that rather than have to do very, very lasting, significant damage to their own production capability. I'm not sure, but I do feel strongly.
Would sign off on it, but it is an interesting proposal.
I'm not sure, but he might, and he might not have much choice. And in any case, it's pretty hard to defend funding his war machine.
Senator, let's talk about some of the issues in the president's budget that really impact our audience. First up, let's talk about this idea of stock buybacks, trying to make sure that executives are not selling into the stock buybacks, which makes sense, but maybe some of the manner for how they'd be doing that in this budget could complicate things.
Honestly, Becky, when I look at these proposals, the huge tax increase on income, on corporate income, on this so-called billionaires tax, the stock buyback, this looks to me like, first of all, it's not going to happen. This is a big gesture to the radical left, right? The wing of the Democrats that don't like capitalism, actually probably a third consider themselves socialists in the first place. This is terrible policy, terrible ideas. A stock buyback is simply the economically rational, sensible, responsible thing to do when the management of a company decides they can't productively deploy marginal capital. They've got an obligation to return it to the people who own the company. And the beauty of the mechanism is you as an investor can decide whether you want to sell or not. That's exactly what should happen in a free society, in a free market economy. This vilification of stock buybacks is completely ridiculous.
You say it's not going to happen. Is that because of Senator Manchin and maybe Senator Sinema, or do you think that that extends beyond just those two members of the Democratic Senate?
Well, I think it's likely that they would oppose this. I think there are others who may not want to publicly declare their opposition, but they realize this is terrible policy, probably don't want to go there. I don't think you get a majority in the Senate to vote for that.
I guess part of that, though, we've been talking about this morning, part of that is advancing the discussion and having a conversation around these things. What do you hear in the halls of the Senate at this point? What do people say if they're not willing to go on the record and say they don't like ideas? What are you hearing behind the scenes?
I just think there are a handful of Democrats beyond just Joe Manchin and Kyrsten Sinema who understand that this would be very damaging. Now, if there's a vote, they're going to vote for it. Probably, right? They're not going to necessarily want to offend the most energized part of their base, which loves every form of tax on productive people. But I think Senator Manchin and Sinema will probably oppose most of these features. I mean, I think Joe Manchin had a good line yesterday about this crazy idea of taxing unrealized gains when he said something to the effect that you can't tax what you don't have. Not a bad rule. We've never taxed unrealized gains. We shouldn't start now. I just don't think they're going to get the votes to do it.
And yet the idea of taxing unrealized gains has come back again and again over the last couple of years. What do you think finally winds up happening? Is this a proposal where unrealized gains would be approved and taxed and it winds up in the court system? Or do you think that there will always be enough people who say that's not a great idea?
I don't know. There's any number of ways they could raise taxes, and maybe they could get to 50 votes, reducing deductions, for instance. I don't know what's going to fly. I mean, I think Kyrsten Sinema has consistently said she's not in favor of raising marginal rates on either individuals or businesses. Senator Manchin has been very clear he doesn't want to be taxing phantom gains on assets. So where they land, I don't know. It'd be better if they don't do anything. But it's possible they find some combination of taxes to raise.
Senator, I don't disagree with you. I think taxing unrealized gains is a very challenging thing to do with all sorts of unintended consequences. The question, though, is, you know, once we always get down to the brass tacks of trying to figure out how do you create a solution, if you will, to what I think is a demonstrable problem. We always say that whatever the details are, they don't work. So what I would ask you is how you feel about taxing carried interest, closing some of the estate tax rules so that we don't have lots of money pouring out there. And so there is maybe perhaps in the context of real estate. I mean, there are ways to do this where I think if you believe that tax policy is part of our democracy and people want to think to themselves, this is a fair system, that there are probably better ways to do it than we're doing it today.
Okay, so I think it's important to start with some big picture context here. Our Democratic colleagues usually justify all of their various creative ways of raising taxes as a way to make sure that the wealthy are paying their fair share. The top 1% of Americans earn about 20% of all the income and pay about 40% of all the income taxes. Somehow that's not their paying twice the rate of what their income is in terms of the percentage of total taxes is somehow not fair. Makes you really wonder what they think about the 50% of Americans who pay no taxes. But I hope I think it's worth asking the question to my Democratic colleagues. What is fair? So what is the fair rate?
There's obviously sales taxes. There's all sorts of other taxes that are Social Security. There's lots of things that are embedded in that. So
all right, sure. But now you're talking different. You're bringing in different categories. Social Security is meant to fund a specific benefit that's related to the taxes you pay. Sales tax is a state and local tax. The majority of the federal government is funded with income taxes, and that statistic is a fact.
I hear your point that if not everybody has skin in the game, there's no reason to think that they wouldn't want rates to continue to climb forever and ever, because it's not going to impact them when it gets to these things.
Right.
Maybe the way of coming at this, though, is how does this play out? You're leaving the Senate. You've got an election that's coming up in November.
Right.
How does this play out? Because a vote in a swing state here or there is going to decide some pretty radical differences in tax policy between the two parties at this point.
Well, I think it all comes down to what they can maintain 50 Democrat senators for, because I think anything that gets 50 Democrat Senate votes and Kamala Harris breaking a tie will pass the House, would then get signed by President Biden. But I think that gig is up at the end of this year. I think Republicans are going to take control of the House and the Senate, and then we're not going to be having conversations about these crazy new ways to raise taxes on people who already pay a lot in taxes. So, that's why our Democratic colleagues feel a lot of pressure to do something quickly, because they know the clock's running.
Senator Toomey, thank you for your time today. It's good to see you.
Thanks for having me.
We're going to have a